All right, good Chodesh. We are on the bottom of Chaf Vav Amud Beis 26b. Today we start really a new section of the Gemara, or a new discussion related to the previous discussion, but not, but self-standing, what's the word I'm looking for? Self-contained discussion. So it's the very last line. Omar Shmuel said. So we quoted Shmuel earlier. He was the one that told us that the shachuf counts as an ish, which spurred the whole discussion from the last few days. So here's another comment from Shmuel with regard to marriage, and specifically the nature of the intimate relationship between husband and wife. So Shmuel says as follows: Yisa Adam, a person should marry. Duma, as Rashi explains for us, but we're going to go with Rashi's interpretation. Duma is a woman who shares with others the nature of her intimate relationship. So he should marry a woman like that, who speaks publicly about their private matters. But Ba'al Yisa Bas Duma, rather than marrying the daughter of such a person. So I would imagine Shmuel's not saying to go seek out a woman who's going to share everything that's going on behind closed doors. On the contrary, virtue is that what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. We refer to it as intimacy, not simply because of the nature of the physical activity, but by the nature of the way we treat it. It's holy, it's sacred, it's personal, and it's private, and it ought to remain that way. Not just physically, in that husband and wife are exclusive to each other, but also verbally. I want you not be speaking to others about what goes on between husband and wife. It's not shneis, it's not modest, but lack of modesty is not just an issue of like the halacha, are you violating the law of modesty, but it's more to the effect of that it undermines the nature of what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to accomplish a space, both physically, emotionally, mentally, a space in which husband and wife are uniquely vulnerable to each other to the exclusion of everyone else. And that's what makes that vulnerability, that intimacy, so unique and so precious and so special, is precisely because it's not shared with anybody else. So as a rule, one ought not to be sharing what happens in privacy with others. It's an unfortunate thing I see amongst, especially in today's modern culture, where everything is out in the open. And it's kind of praised. Yeah, we talk about everything. Everything's on the table. We don't sweep anything under the rug. And that has virtue, not sweeping things under the rug, especially when you're talking about abuses or things of that nature. It's a fantastic thing that these things are being exposed, because exposing the negativity will, God willing, put an end to this negativity. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Is that the expression? Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So yes, it's true, certain things need to be exposed in order that they be healed. But certain things ought not to be exposed. We have to know where that is. When we say yes to the world around us, and when we say no, beyond this point, the world doesn't come in, because this is our private, sacred space. The Zohar, the Kabbalah, refers to the bedroom as the Holy of Holies, or actually the reverse, refers to the Holy of Holies as Cheda Mitos, the bridal chamber, the bedroom of Hashem and the Jewish people. It's an intimate, sacred place. And the Holy of Holies is not opened for everybody to see. It's holy, it's sacred. Once a year, one Jew goes in there, representing or embodying all the Jewish people, but only once a year. And it's behind curtain and with a special with a sobriety and an awareness and an elevated state of holiness, a person enters there because you're entering into a sacred, vulnerable, open, and honest space. And the only way for that honesty and vulnerability and intimacy to be maintained is if it's to the exclusion of everybody else but husband and wife. So that's a rule. However, I'm assuming now Shmuel speaking, when a person has the choice, so to speak, which one is worse? Marrying a woman who herself shares everything that's going on behind closed doors, or marrying a woman whose mother shares everything behind closed doors? Which one would be worse? Or which one's better off? So Shmuel says you're better off marrying a woman who talks about her intimacy than marrying someone whose mother talks about intimacy. Why is that? A woman who herself is open about her intimacy and shares it with everybody, but whose mother is not. So she was born of kosher seed. In other words, a woman who talks about what's going behind closed doors, there is a suspicion that she takes in general the notion of intimacy lightly. And perhaps she wasn't as faithful to her husband as she should have been. And therefore her daughter is somewhat of question. Who is the father? So we can't confirm this. Certainly something might not be going on. Right? So we're concerned if you're a woman whose mother just speaks openly about what's going on behind closed doors, something is amiss. And be careful about marrying such a girl who knows who the father is, who knows what kind of intimacy produced this child, considering that she takes the whole thing lightly, the mother does. And therefore, better, even if the daughter is not treating the intimacy with the proper respect, but at least her parents did. So we know she was born in wholesomeness. And therefore, this woman whose mother is open about everything and just takes the whole thing lightly, there's a suspicion that there might be an imperfect seed, a forbidden seed. Sorry?
Flawed lineage?
Yeah, a flawed lineage. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. Yeah. So this is Shmuel's position. Shmuel's position is, even if currently this woman isn't perfect, because she's sharing everything that's going on behind closed doors, but at least her birth was fine. Her parents were okay. That what produced her and brought her to this world, the intimacy of what brought her to this world, is wholesome. Rabbi Yochanan says the reverse. Rabbi Yochanan says the other way around. Yisa Adam Bastuma. Better marry a girl whose mother doesn't take intimacy so seriously. But don't marry a woman who's going to do that. Because your intimacy is going to become in question now. Your wife may not be faithful to you, and she's going to be sitting there and chatting about your intimacy. Because a woman whose mother takes intimacy lightly, talks about everything, and therefore there's a suspicion maybe she was unfaithful. Says Rabbi Yochanan, that suspicion is far and few between, and the majority of her intimacy was to do with her husband, even if there are some times when she was unfaithful. And therefore, as a rule, we would assume that this woman is born of a wholesome intimacy. And therefore, even if her mother-in-law, your mother-in-law, this woman's mother, talks about everything and there's suspicion of maybe she was unfaithful, the girl you're marrying is probably born of a proper intimacy, probably. And at least she's not talking about your intimacy. And at least she's not someone who's suspected of unfaithfulness. But this woman, a woman who herself is frivolous and talks about everything and doesn't take intimacy with the kind of sacredness that we hope for, but cheskas kasher, she at least will behave properly. So this is the dispute between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. Whereas Shmuel said that even if the woman right now is not perfect, she takes the whole intimacy lightly, but at least we know she was born. She's presumed to be born of a, no, it's not necessarily virtuous per se, because we know she's a Duma. She herself talks about everything. She takes the whole thing lightly. That we know, what's Shmuel's opinion. But at least she was born of proper lineage, because her mother-in-law takes it properly, because her mother takes intimacy seriously. That's Shmuel. So Shmuel says, let's focus on how she came into this world. Did she come into this world in a wholesome manner? As for the fact that right now she's not behaving properly, but at least she was born in a wholesome manner. And therefore you know that her lineage is fine, even if she may be not perfect. Rabbi Yochanan says the reverse. Even if her lineage isn't perfect, first of all, it probably is okay. Maybe it's not perfect because her mother is chatty. Okay, but she's still not like as if all of her, it's not as if she never was intimate with her husband and was only unfaithful. Okay, maybe she wasn't faithful, but she wasn't unfaithful, but certainly the majority of time she would have been with her husband, and therefore probably this girl is born of a proper lineage. But at least she is not treating intimacy lightly. At least she's a virtuous woman, even if her lineage is not 1010% perfect. So it's like an interesting dispute that we would have in modern days. Should we worry about which one would take precedence? Yichus, lineage, or the girl's virtue? Which one? If a girl is less virtuous, but better yichus. We have a girl better yichus, but less virtuous. Which one do you choose? There's a dispute between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. So I'll make the argument both ways. Rabbi Yochanan's position, where preferably we look at her virtue, even though maybe her lineage is not perfect. This is self-understood, right? We can't control people's past. We can control the people, the generations before us, but we can control how we behave. So says Rabbi Yochanan, marry a woman who you can build a good, happy, healthy marriage with, and you're not 100% sure what her history is. So what? Forward-looking.
Not her fault.
It's not her fault. Forward-looking. You know she's a good girl, so her mother's not such a good person. Okay. Give her the presumption of innocence. Give her the presumption of good lineage, and at least the two of you can build a healthy, good marriage going forward. And Shmuel would argue like this, perhaps. A person's past, a person's upbringing, tells you about the potentiality that this person has. So even if the person isn't perfect now, but if you know they come from good stock, then with the right guidance and with the right work, they have the potential to go in great ways. So perhaps this is the dispute between Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. The literal level is, whether or not you are worried about her lineage on a halachic level. That's the literal level. Perhaps expanding the dispute a little broader and to make it in modern terms of, yichus, good lineage versus a good girl. Which one should you choose? Here's the virtues of each way. A girl comes from, a good family. Okay, but she experimented a little bit in her life and she, veered off the path a little bit. But her foundation is solid. So at some point in time, she's going to come back to that foundation. So now she's not perfect. Okay. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, forget her past, forget her history. Look at her. She's an amazing girl, notwithstanding the fact that her home is not so good, but she worked to make herself into a good girl. That's the girl you want. So you can see the virtue in each way. You can see there's what to be said for each side. And if we're talking about an actual reality of someone choosing a shidduch based on these considerations, then a person should think about who they are and match accordingly. Am I the kind of person that I rely heavily on my upbringing, on the foundation I've been given? Then maybe it would be best if I found a girl who also has that kind of foundation. And then the two of us can look back at her foundation to build forward. If I'm the kind of guy who myself had to fight for the virtue I have, my foundation is not so strong. My parents, my family didn't provide that strong roots, but I fought for who I am. I fought for my virtue. I emerged a virtuous person, even though notwithstanding my circumstance. Then maybe that's the kind of girl I should find. Find the kind of girl who also had to earn her virtue, even though her mother is not so virtuous. Right? And that way the two of you can build together. So this explains why this is something that happens often and people get a little annoyed at it. But now if you look at it this way, you'll understand why. People ask all the time, oh, I'm Baal Tshuva. How come, the guy with Yichus is not going to marry my daughter? As if Baal Tshuvas are somehow second class citizen. It happens sometimes. Baal Tshuvas feel that way. Baal Tshuva feels like I'm a second class because look, my daughter's not going to marry the shliach's son or something. I mean, first of all, it does happen. It's not as if all my siblings married people who are generations of the Lubavitch. It's not the case. It happens plenty of times where there's a Baal Tshuva will marry someone who's born from, and so on. But now you understand why. Baal Tshuva will marry another Baal Tshuva because the two of them had a similar experience in earning the virtue they have. And because they both earned their virtue in the same way, they now can get married and further build that virtue together. You have one spouse who didn't earn her virtue. Her virtue is built on what she was given. And the other spouse earned their own virtue. So sometimes the nature of that virtue isn't the same. And when they try to build together, there are certain tensions that could end up rising. So you see from here from Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel that there's virtue in both directions. And each person has to know where they stand and what would work best for them. Right? Even though, as we're going to see in a moment, the Gemara is going to bring a conclusion as to follow the halacha in favor of Shmuel. No, sorry, in favor of, who was it? I'm sorry, in favor of Rabbi Yochanan. That better marry a girl who herself is virtuous rather relying on a lineage. So Rabbi Yochanan seems to be, seems to be the right way. The right way is take the girl into consideration herself, forget the background. But at least I'm giving you both sides of the coin as to where it comes from. Yeah. In fact, I just heard a story recently of Beryl Futafas has a story. Rabbi Beryl Futafas is a chassid who lives in London, England. He says like this. When Beryl Futafas's father is the famous Rabbi Mendel Futafas. Rabbi Mendel Futafas was a Jew who was sent for 20-something years in the Russian gulags for being part of the Chabad underground during the Soviet era. So his wife and children left Russia in 1946 on the Alshanim, what were they called? The Ashlan, I forget what they were called. They were the trains of Jews who left, or people who left Russia on fake Polish passports. So after World War II, the Russians allowed any Polish citizens to leave Russia. So there was a great window of opportunity for Jewish families to get Hasidim and Jewish families in general to get fake Polish passports to escape Russia. My wife's great-grandmother was very heavily involved in forging these passports to get people out. She herself didn't get out. She died in Russia. But she was famous, Talmud Sotah. She was a famous personality during this era and working in the Russian underground at the time, especially in this program, this great mission of getting Jews out of Russia with fake Polish passports. So it's a small window of opportunity. Now, Rabbi Mendel Futafas actually worked together with my wife's great-grandmother, Talmud Sotah. They worked together on the same board. It was a famous VAD. There was a board of people who got together to oversee the project, to raise funds, to get fake passports, to organize trains and buses and all that kind of, no buses, but wagons, all that kind of stuff. So Talmud Sotah was on the board, and so was Mendel Futafas. Yeah, so Mendel Futafas is a Chabad hero. Talk about a man, he got his wife and children out, but he stayed behind in Russia to help others get out. And while he was helping others, he got sent to Siberia for 20 years. So his wife is raising his children in London alone for 20 years until he came out of Russia, I think in the 70s sometime.
So he was in the
for 20 years. He was stuck in Siberia for 20 years. Yeah. Famous character. He came out with a famous sense of humor and lighthearted. And you would think a guy like that would be broken. Not at all. Anyway, after he came out of Russia, he wanted to stay in London and go into business. Never told him, sorry, off to Israel, shlichus. You got to go become a mashpia, mentor for the boys in Kfar Chabad in Israel. Anyway, Mendel is a special person. So you're talking about a Mendel Futafas, who's of a great lineage, Chabad for I don't know how many generations, a hero of Lubavitch. And his son, Beryl, was getting married alone, without a father, just with his mother looking after him in London. Son Beryl. So Beryl is dating a girl, And the girl's parents are like conservative. I think his father was a conservative rabbi, which obviously didn't have a beard. So it bothered him. He's going to marry a girl whose father doesn't have a beard. And moreover, bothered him. His father is stuck in jail in Russia, no communication. What's his father going to think of such a shidduch? Is it appropriate for a Mendel Futafas's Mechutin, the Mendel Futafas's son, to marry a daughter of a guy who doesn't have a beard? He felt like he was letting his father down, so to speak. His father's going to be disappointed. You marry my Mechutin is a guy who's beardless. The Mendel Futafas, the great hero of Chabad. So he wrote to the Rebbe. He wrote to the Rebbe his concerns. And the Rebbe wrote back, the parents are irrelevant. The parents are irrelevant. So Rabbi Futafas says, I understood the answer to mean at the time. He understood to mean that her parents are irrelevant. Whether his father or her father has a beard, doesn't have a beard, doesn't matter. She's a good girl. Marry her. As the Gemara concludes here in Rabbi Yochanan's favor, she's a good girl, marry her. But then Rabbi Futafas said like this, he said a beautiful word. He said, I realized later that Rebbe wasn't just saying that her parents don't matter. Rebbe was saying my parents don't matter. What my parents think of her parents is not relevant to my shidduch making. He understood it to mean that her parents don't matter. Okay, her parents don't have a beard. So what? She's a good girl. And that's true. But deeper, Rebbe also meant your parents don't matter. You're marrying based on what your parents think you're supposed to be marrying. That's not how you marry. You marry based on what's right and proper for you. And she's right and proper for you. Good. So your father might not like it when he comes out in 10 years from now. So what? You're marrying her, not your father. This is the depth of what Baruch Futafas says in this letter. And I think it comes down to this discussion in the Gemara. But anyway, at least now we have both sides of the coin as to why one might feel one way or the other. A person who himself perhaps relies on the foundation that they have in their Yiddishkeit might look for someone else as the same. On the other hand, someone who himself fought for his virtue will look for a girl who fought virtue. At the end, as we just learned, as we're going to learn, okay, let's learn it now. We'll see. Let's get to the Gemara's conclusion, right? But as the conclusion is, as we're going to see in a minute now, that what's most important is the girl's virtue. And if the parents aren't as virtuous, no. If she's a virtuous girl, marry her. That's the conclusion, as is Rabbi Yochanan's view. So let's see. The Gemara says like this: Meisvei, we raise the following objection. So I remember we've discussed it a number of times that the way in which the Gemara introduces a question tells you what kind of question it is. So when the Gemara introduces a question with the word meisvei, it means that we're going to quote a text that's of a higher level than the text being quoted now. So the people speaking now is Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan are both sages of the Amoraic age, of the Gemara age. Right at the beginning of the Gemara age, I think I mentioned before, Rabbi Yochanan was in between the Tanaic age and the Gemara age. Shmuel is a student of Rabbi Yochanan, so it's the next generation down, but they're the first generation of the Gemara scholars. We're going to quote now a passage from a Mishnaic age text. So it's a challenge to the position, but from a source greater than the one speaking. So what does that Mishnaic age text state? It says as follows: Noisa Adam Duma, a person should marry a girl who herself doesn't take intimacy seriously, as long as her parents take it seriously. Yeah, so this seems to contradict Rabbi Yochanan's view. Rabbi Yochanan was the view, he said, look at the girl. If she herself is virtuous, good, even if her parents aren't. And this Mishnah case says no. Say, marry a girl who isn't virtuous, but as long as her parents are. Amar Rava, so this seems to be a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's position. So Amar Rava responds in defending Rabbi Yochanan's position. The Tizbita, are you really going to think that this Mishnah, are you taking this Mishnaic text, this Mishnaic age text literally? The Mishnaic age text says, Noisa, thou should marry. L'chatchila, you're saying in the first instance?
Sounds like he's saying,
One second. Rabbi Yochanan saying, Rabbi is saying, are you taking the Mishnaic age text literally? The words in the Mishnaic age text are, Noisa Adam Duma, thou shalt marry a girl who is not virtuous. L'chatchila, are you telling me that this Mishnaic age text is saying that you should go find an unvirtuous girl? Obviously not. Ella, rather, you have to say, Imna Satani. You must say that the Mishnaic age text meant to say, if you happen to have married an unvirtuous girl, that's okay, because at least her parents are unvirtuous. Because at least her parents are virtuous, right? So in other words, what Rabbi is saying is we have to say that the Mishnah doesn't mean it literally, or we have to say, more importantly, we have to say that the Mishnaic text here is not accurate. Because not that it's not accurate, but that as it's been written down and recorded, someone missed a few words. What's the proof that someone missed a few words? Because the language here is noisa, a person should marry. That sounds like you should go find a girl who's not virtuous. Obviously, the Mishnah's not saying that. So you anyways have to amend the text to say that if you married. So once you're amending the text, nami bastuma, you can amend the text and say that if you got to marry a girl who's the daughter of someone not virtuous, because you're anyways amending the text. The point Rav is saying is that this Mishnah text you're quoting to be a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan is not a conclusive text, because you can see from the text itself that it was not recorded correctly. Because the language of this text is, thou shalt marry an imperfect girl. Who would do that? Why would a Mishnah text read to go find an unvirtuous girl? Rather, you must say it means, if you happen to have married an unvirtuous girl. So if you're changing the text anyway, you can change the text to say that you're marrying the daughter of an unvirtuous girl. The point being, this Mishnaic text cannot be taken at face value, because obviously
Doesn't make any sense.
the Mishnaic text is not recorded accurately, and therefore does not pose a contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan's view. So back to the beginning, we have a dispute. Shmuel says, get good lineage even if she's not a perfect girl. Rabbi Yochanan says, get a good girl even if she's not perfect lineage. The Hilchasa and halacha is, Yisa Adam Bas Duma. A person should better marry a girl who is the daughter of a non-virtuous woman, as long as she is virtuous, even if her mother is not. Ba'al Yisa Duma, and stay away from marrying a girl who is not virtuous. Because even if her past is not 100% perfect, you can't verify the 100% veracity of her lineage. Don't worry about that. If she's a good, virtuous girl, marry her and build a virtuous home together. This is the Gemara's discussion on whether FFBs should marry Balchuas. FFB stands for from birth. And it's not literally what the Gemara is discussing, but perhaps we can extrapolate as we explained before. Okay, wonderful day and a good Chodesh.
Good Chodesh, good Shabbos. All the very best to you. God bless you.
I wish you a good day.
All the very best, Yeshua. Take care, all of you. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.